Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Aidan Eyakuze. I'm Executive Director of Twaweza East Africa. I'm based in Tanzania, but we have operations in Kenya and Uganda as well.
And since you have staff in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, what are some of the differences and similarities in terms of how those three governments have responded to COVID?
Oh, they are very different. And the big outlier here is Tanzania. Tanzania did not institute any lockdown or any emergency stance at all from a government perspective. It has taken what I'm going to call the Sweden route, which is to provide sort of communication about hygienic strategies for avoiding COVID, mask wearing, some kind of social distancing, but it has not been enforced in Tanzania. Contrast this with a place like Kenya or Uganda, where it has been very, shall I say, aggressively enforced by government to the extent that human rights violations were occurring, that people were to stay at home or be in home by 6 o'clock in the evening. I'm talking here in the case of Kenya's dusk to dawn curfews. And in the first few days, in fact, 4 or 6 people died as a result of, I think, police action and trying to beat people back home. Uganda has been also pretty stringent on that front. But when you look then at Uganda's sort of case trajectory, it's been fairly shallow. I don't know, it's now May 18th. I'm not recalling whether they've had any deaths in Uganda from COVID-19. If so, it may be in the very, very low teens, if as many as 10. I think Kenya, has had a few more deaths and rather more infections. Tanzania, they stopped giving official data back on April 24th. So we actually don't know what the infection rate of the cases are and the number of people who are dying. Anecdotally, a lot of people have been dying, including prominent people like the Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs, former Minister for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Augustine Mahiga. He passed away. It's never been told or confirmed whether it was COVID or not. But quite a number of senior government officials have actually succumbed to the disease. 3 MPs passed away quickly and suddenly. I have a friend who also passed away. He's a district commissioner in rural Tanzania. He also, within 4 days, fell sick and died. So anecdotes suggest that there is quite a bit more in terms of death in Tanzania and infection, but the government is not releasing official statistics.
If I understand correctly, Twaweza organized a debate about civil society's role in working with government and maybe pushing back against government a little bit. Can you describe that debate?
This was about a week and a few days ago. It was in the context of the Open Recovery, Open Response Week that the Open Government Partnership was promoting, a campaign globally. So we decided we would have something today. We had a debate in which the motion was essentially, and I paraphrase, that civil society should now support government in its delivery of services and emergency equipment and stop criticizing them. And so we had 2 people for the motion, defend the motion, and others sort of oppose the motion. And it was a very interesting debate in the sense that we had a poll before the debate, and quite a number of, in the beginning, we had people more in favor of, yes, civil society should actually fall in line and behind government and support it and stop criticizing. But by the end of the debate, it had actually was 50-50. So the people who were opposing the motion were able to persuade more people to their side, to their view. I think the things that emerged out of the debate was, on the one side, here's an emergency. The argument, this is an emergency. We must all actually pull together and support, especially the government supporting those who are most affected by this. But on the other, the big sort of against motion was around transparency. We need to know at least two things about transparency. One is if people are providing resources, whether they're in kind or in cash, we need to know how these are being used by government on behalf of citizens. We want to know where this money is going. And the second is we actually really need more information about the state of the pandemic in our country. And those two things were a week ago and have not changed now, still opaque. So the debate actually ended up saying we actually need to know more. We need much more openness from the government so that we feel more confident about supporting. But otherwise, the role of civil society is actually to keep an eye open, or to open society's eye and monitor government action on behalf of its citizens. Even if it is an emergency, even if it is a crisis moment, there is a very important role for civil society to seek and promote accountability.
Looking a few years ahead, what do you think are going to be some of the major effects of this pandemic? How are you thinking about Twaweza's role in preparing for the future of East Africa?
I think fiscally, it's going to be very difficult. These three economies rely quite a bit on tourism for foreign exchange. I think that sector is going to suffer deeply and will have a serious impact on jobs and on the government's tax collections. I think the other side is trade. Trade generates a large volume of tax revenue for all three countries. I think that's going to be a real challenge. But I think the upshot is that it's going to hit a lot, it already has hit a lot of people very hard on the pocket. Perhaps less so in Tanzania because we didn't have a formal lockdown, but certainly in Kenya and Uganda, I think people have really had a hard knock on their daily livelihoods. So how do you then recover from that? Will businesses survive an extended lockdown period? I think that's going to be a big question mark. So I think there's going to be deeper poverty. One other aspect is deeper inequality as well. Those of us who are very lucky were able to continue working from home have not seen our own incomes and financial situations go under a lot of stress. But there are going to be very many who surround us who have experienced that. And I think the inequality is going to widen. If I think about just schools, for example, whereas our children might be able to do school online, there are many kids who are just not able at all to get any schooling, who've been out of school for a month. Is that going to go on for 6 months, for better part of a year? We don't know. And that those learning outcomes will likely be affected. So inequality, I think, is going to be an important element. I think we're going to see, if the data is good enough, we're going to see that a very hard break was hit on progress on SDGs, even though the progress wasn't exactly hugely dynamic, even by 2010, some breaks would have been hit on progress there. On gender equality, for example, violence against women, even in our own little space here, without lockdown, seems to have been a bit on the increase. And I think finally, and I'm really not sure which way things will pan out here, but the contract between citizens and the state, I think, will also undergo some element of transformation. Either it could be the case that citizens will ask more of their government, or, and I think this is the more likely, we're going to be even more cap in hand for any assistance, any support that the government may be able to give, but the government itself will be severely constrained to be able to support and improve people's livelihoods at this time. So it's going to be a very tough time for most citizens, and I think there'll be an element of sitting back and an element of passivity and hoping that the government will come to the table. Which raises then, so what does an organization like Twaweza, what should we be doing? How ought we to place ourselves in this kind of context? I think even more intensely, we need to be able to provide an alternative voice, alternative information, alternative analysis, alternative thinking to citizens, maybe even to government, at a time like this, to try and promote the idea that we have to actually open up the space for citizens to make their contributions in terms of thoughts, analysis, and energy into rebuilding or accelerating the recovery from the pandemic. I think if we are able to do that, if we're able to put some real ideas on the table based on what we think or what we find out from citizens is their real experience, then it slightly changes the relationship. It makes one a lot more collaborative than it is more passive and expectant of government.